So a little birdie told me that tomorrow is your birthday, Conrad.
It is, yes. I'm 35.
Wow. You
Again.
look great for that age. I never would have guessed it.
Yeah, I've been 35 for a while now.
Haven't we all?
Mm.
Yeah, so no, I was wondering like what the differences might be between birthdays in the US versus birthdays in the UK. And we all take for granted these things are kind of the same, but I don't know if they actually are. So one thing that happens over here as an adult anyway, when it's your birthday, is when you go to work, your coworkers will like pool their money and get you a grocery store sheet cake and like have it in the break room. And then at like lunch or, early in the morning, everyone's like, ooh, there's cake in the break room for so-and-so's birthday. And then everyone gets to go in there, even if they don't like you or know you, and get cake. And then that helps people to like you. So I was just wondering, like, is that, something that happens there?
No. Is there singing in the US as well?
Sometimes.
Oh, good grief. No. So in the UK, and anybody in the comments, if your experience is different, then please let us know. But in the UK, if you are gauche enough to actually mention that it's your birthday coming up, then everyone will demand that you buy cake. Nobody's buying cake for you.
Oh my
So,
God, that's so harsh.
yeah. So you have to bring cakes in, a selection thereof. But most people just never mention it.
Well, the
Yeah.
nice thing about that would be you would get the cake you like
True.
instead of just like some really plain vanilla thing.
Yeah. So you would normally get a selection of stuff, usually, like those large cookies and maybe even cream cakes if you were feeling generous. But yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're very repressed here, you'll be surprised to hear. Not terribly demonstrative.
Well, yeah, another rumor that I've heard is that like at least at children's birthday parties that like when the kids bring a gift, it goes onto a gift table and then but it's not opened until after the party when no one's around. Do you think is that true?
I believe so. See, as a kid, you'll be shocked to hear this, terribly unpopular.
I
So
am shocked to hear that actually.
I was never invited to a birthday party, and I never had one because I knew that nobody would come. So,
So what you're saying is if we ever like hang out in person, we should make you do like all of the kids' birthday games that you never got to do as a kid, like pin the tail on the donkey and
well,
whatever.
can I amend that by saying that I was quite relieved that this never
Nope,
happened?
you can't.
Oh no.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Well, I hope you do have something that you personally enjoy, whatever that is, tomorrow on your birthday. At least you will not be working. But today, I have you working on Dreamland. So, welcome to Dreamland, everyone. My name is Melinda.
My name is Conrad.
And today we are talking about, well, actually, let's start with, as always, we posted a one-word clue online. Let me just pop that up on the screen to remind everyone what it looked like. There we go. And the word was cause, C-A-U-S-E, because somebody thought it was C-A-W-S, like a crow cause, but no, it's cause. And as per usual, we had everyone guess what the topic was going to be about. Lots of people did correctly guess it this time. Although Keith Holmesley said TV violence and its effect on children causing aggressive violent behavior. So that's
Wow.
kind of an interesting idea. Tadashi Sasagawa said, all for a good cause. It makes me think of charity and the impact that Band-Aids, Do They Know It's Christmas, and USA for Africa's We Are the World did because nobody had ever assembled artists for a good cause before. Then there was Hands Across America in 86, Live Aid in 85, and the very special Christmas album in 87, all of them going for a cause. And then Wicked Person also said pop stars saving the world like Live Aid. So we were fairly transparent this time, apparently, Conrad.
Oh,
We're going to
that's
try to
okay.
ramp that up next month and make it a little more challenging. But yes, our topic this month is charity singles and the 80s spectacle of giving. So things like Live Aid, We Are the World, and we will touch on some others as well.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I actually started thinking about doing this not because of We Are the World, which was very well known here in the States, but more with the Hands Across America thing, because I was like, what was that all about? And so I started doing some digging, and it was sort of this can of worms. So that's what brings us
Mm.
here today. Were you super aware of this as a kid, Conrad? Like the whole like Live Aid thing?
Live Aid. Live Aid was huge here. I think I'd put it sort of in terms of its a social landmark. It's kind of the same as the 2012 Olympics for me, just in terms of a sense of a big event that everybody was watching or going to see to be a part of. So yeah,
Wow,
it was a big deal.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, because most of this stuff, there were a few charity concerts and songs that were done before Live Aid. Notably, the whole Bangladesh thing that I think George Harrison did. Um, but we're really focusing on the 80s, and I mean, you really Live Aid was so huge. To your point, it's sort of kind of where we're going to start. So most of the initial charity concerts in the 80s were about the Ethiopian famine. And please don't panic when I tell you guys this, but I do want to give a very brief, like 3 to 5 minutes tops, overview of what was actually going on in Ethiopia, just so that you have a little bit of context. It's a very complicated issue, of course. It's hard to kind of go through all of it, but quickly, I just wanted to give you some ideas. So the Ethiopian famine from 1983 to 85 killed up to 1.2 million people, and it displaced twice as many as that, and it orphaned around 200,000 children. So it was really, really horrible. The heaviest hit areas were Tigray, Wollo, and Eritrea, which I have on the map to show where in Africa Ethiopia is, because believe it or not, even though we called all this stuff about Africa, it was very specific to Ethiopia and
Mm.
very specific to the very northernmost regions, primarily in Ethiopia during that time. So it wasn't really Africa, it was specifically Ethiopia. Um, these were very rural areas with extremely limited road and transportation networks, and they were the scenes of long-standing anti-government rebellions, which created very difficult security situations. Um, just a little bit of context. So, Ethiopia traces its history as a country back 3,000 years, and it's the only African country that has never been colonized.
Mm.
And so, in the mid 70s, um, the government of Haile Selassie was overthrown, and a repressive regime was established as a military junta. So, in the 70s, there had been this famine, another famine in a different area, I believe, and it was taking place in areas where groups opposed Haile Selassie, who was the emperor, and the famine was brought on by drought, and but it was also compounded by an inadequate government response to get extra food to the affected areas. Um, and I'm not going to show slides of starving people because I feel like we've all seen a lot of that, and I just don't want to do that. But there had been a lot of coup attempts in the 60s, and you know, Haile Selassie and his government had basically set like cracked down on insurgent groups and stuff like that, and so they were kind of punishing areas where those like rebellions were happening, and so that's kind of also part of what was leading to the 70s famine. But the 70s famine was so bad that it caused a socialist overthrow of the government by what essentially was like a USSR funded socialist military junta. So it was like a Soviet style government that came in with Mengistu. Okay. And so he came in and overthrew the monarchy. by a group called the Derg. He was the head of the Derg, DERG, which were later established as a provisional government. And so they were a socialist military junta, and they focused, among other things, on land reform. And so basically, they were taking all of the rural land and taking control of it and then redistributing it, and all of the grain and all of the food and stuff like that. Um, so they basically took people's land away from them and gave it to the government, which wasn't super popular. So those rural areas were where a lot of like fighting was going on. And so they were trying to kind of starve some of those people out. And there were also bad roads there to even get resources there. So when the drought then later hit, people were already kind of starving. So it was
Yeah.
super like rough. And that led to a drastic fall in like food and resources for these people. So the grain merchants in particular were blamed for the famines of the 70s by this new regime, and they were seen as class enemies of the revolution, obviously, because right, they don't want their land to be taken away from them and given to the government. They want to keep their land. So they were kind of being punished in a way. So there was this Red Terror campaign, that's what they called it, that began in the mid to late 70s, and a lot of politically based killings. Some say as high as 500,000. So 10 years after the Derg took over, that's when we get this 1984 to 85 famine that was going on in Ethiopia. And now initially, they didn't really advertise that this was going on, right? Like they didn't want it to look like they weren't doing a good job, because it was kind of their 10-year anniversary of being in power in Ethiopia. And so they were in the city. A lot of the people in the city were unaware that people out in the rural areas were starving. So they were having these
Oh,
big parades and they were doing all this stuff, but in reality, all these people were like starving. So when it leaked out and the world found out about it, it was very embarrassing, and all of this stuff. And so that's where like all of this stuff sort of, and it kind of got blamed on this drought, which was happening, but that was just exacerbating an already underlying problem, right?
right. Okay.
So, just to give you a little bit of the final bit of context I want to give you is, while the drought certainly exacerbated the problems, like I said, complex political machinations were a driving force behind this 84 Ethiopian famine. And I pulled some CIA documents that have been subsequently released. This was a write up from July 15th of 1985, and it talks about like factors that have been affecting the efforts to feed and care for the Ethiopian population. So it just talks about like challenges with the highway system being very primitive, serious shortage of trucks and repair mechanics. So it's difficult to get supplies, even if you have them over there. It's difficult to like get them to the people. And I'm pointing this out because, as we will see with Live Aid, We Are the World, all of these things, you can get food and supplies over there, but then getting them within the country to the affected people is still very challenging, because during this time, there were some areas you just could not go to because of military fighting and drama and stuff like that. Like roadblocks were set up, and there was only like one road. So
Right. Okay.
just kind of wanted to give that context. So, but what's more challenging than Ethiopian politics of the 80s could be wrangling a huge group of musical artists in the 80s to all be in one place at one time and do a kind-hearted giving thing. So what do you think, Conrad? Tell me a little bit about Live Aid.
Okay. Well, Live Aid, of course, starts with Band Aid, and that starts with one man, the lovely Bob Geldof, and his partner Paula Yates, who, on the 24th of October 1984, were watching the BBC 6 o'clock news, which in those days commanded an audience of 10 million people in the UK. That's a sixth of the UK population. We didn't have that many channels back then, Melinda. Uh, and so 10 million people watched journalist Michael Burke's second report on the famine in Ethiopia. And yeah, I'm not going to show lots of pictures from that because we're not going to do that. But needless to say, Bob and his partner Paula were horrified at what they saw, and it preyed on his mind. He was even captured on film talking about it at a launch event days later, and he was visibly shocked by the apathy that he encountered amongst the celebrities around him. Shock, surprise, Melinda, celebrities don't care about starving children in Africa.
Really? Because the 80s taught me that they really cared a lot.
Well, yeah, I think Bob managed to stir them up a little bit. So
He
within
held them at
days,
gunpoint, didn't he? Like, he's
I
actually
wouldn't
really
put it
cute in this
past him.
photo. Like, every photo I've ever seen of him, he's not, but like, he's like kind of a cutie there.
Yeah, so he's the front man of a band, the Boomtown Rats, who was sort of past their prime at this point. But yeah, quite a force of nature as it turned out, because within days he decided to put together a charity record, and he called his friend Midure of Ultravox, Sting from the Police, and Simon Le Bon of Duran Duran,
Mm.
and Band Aid assembled, sort of like the Avengers, on Saturday, the 24th of November 1984, exactly 1 month after the news report, which is quite an achievement. And he
Wow.
managed to get in the same room Bono, Boy George, Phil Collins, Banana Rama,
Mm.
Heaven 17, Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran, George Michael of Wham at the time, Status Quo, Sting, of course, probably being tantric in some way, Paul Weller, and Paul Young, plus sundry others. Uh, and the single was released days later. I mean, it was just shocking the turnaround that they managed. It immediately hit number one and became the fastest ever selling single in Britain. It remained the best selling single until Elton John re recorded Candle in the Wind in 1997 with new lyrics jammed in there to reference Princess Diana's funeral, which is a bit gauche. Side story: Band Aid prevented participant George Michael from achieving his dream of having 4 UK number ones in 1 year. I
How
learned in that.
dare they?
Yes. It featured in that new Netflix documentary about Wham. If anybody hasn't watched it, it is quite fun.
Yes.
So yeah, he'd already had a hit with "Wake Me Up Before You Go Go," "Careless Whisper," and
The way you
"Freedom."
said that with such derision.
Oh, I love it. Tambourines Ahoy. He had a brilliant idea for a possible Christmas number one, but unfortunately his song Last Christmas got stuck at number two. And he was secretly devastated, but he took a philosophical approach. And a little known fact, I did not know this, he has ensured that, or he's no longer with us sadly, but he ensured that all royalties from the song was also donated to the Band Aid Trust. So there isn't a penny from Last Christmas and every resurrection it's had over the years that hasn't gone towards good causes. So
Wow.
he was a good sport about it, even if privately it crushed him. It eventually went to number one on New Year's Day in 2021, 5 years after George Michael died on Christmas Day in
Mm.
2016.
Yes. Heartbreaking. I was very sad that day because I always loved him a lot.
Yeah, he was an incredible artist. So Geldof thought that Band Aid and their lovely song, "Do They Know It's Christmas? Tonight, thank God it's them instead of you." Lovely lyrics.
Great album cover as well, by the way. Like, I have
It,
to say, it's terrifying. It's one of the most terrifying things I think I've ever seen.
to me, it looks like one of those Terry Gilliam Monty Python
It
animations.
does. It really does. And the poor starving Ethiopian children at the bottom who are in black and white in this very Victorian Christmas cutout. It's very odd.
It's very strange. But yeah, there we go. Geldof thought that this wonderful effort would raise something like £50,000 that they could donate to Oxfam. Just a small gesture, but a contribution nonetheless. Whoops, it raised 8 million. The feeling is that it tapped into a growing sense of impotence and empathy in the UK, as well as a rejection of the greed is good yuppie culture that had emerged in the Reagan and Thatcher 80s. So it was mostly working class people giving more than they had. The funds were used to buy and transport food, 150 tons of high energy biscuits, that's cookies for you, uh,
Limbus
1,000
bread.
lembas bread. Yeah, that would be good. 1,335 tons of milk powder. Anyway, lots and lots and lots and lots of food.
Yes.
But as you mentioned, a few months later, Geldof became frustrated because they were having trouble distributing the proceeds. And to quote Midjure of Ultravox, Bob said we needed to break this trucking cartel. Knowing Bob, I'd be surprised if it was the word trucking, but we'll see. We need to break this trucking cartel in Ethiopia and buy a fleet of trucks and spares to deliver the aid ourselves. And in order to raise the cash, Geldof had the bright idea of organizing a concert.
Mm.
And Live Aid was born. Geldof spent 14 hours a day in meetings and another 4 or 5 on the phone to the US at night trying to organize the concert. To put it in context, no computers were involved in the planning of Live Aid. None.
I mean, I was going to compare it to Iconicon, but that would be different.
No. The number of
Kidding, of course.
spreadsheets involved in Iconicon alone would have just stunned Geldof trying to prepare Live Aid.
True.
The lineup was aimed to be bipartisan, so it was supposed to be the old guard of rock and roll, so artists like Elton John and Bowie and Paul McCartney sharing the stage with the 80s new romantics like Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet and the Thompson Twins. It's quite an impressive lineup, really, when you look at it.
Hmm.
At first, Bob found it impossible to get anyone to commit to being on Live Aid. Band Aid they thought was lightning in a bottle and an admirable gimmick, but nobody thought he could pull this off. So he bluffed a lot of artists into participating. So, for example, he called Elton John and told him that Queen and Bowie were on board when he hadn't even spoken to them. And got Elton on board, and then he called Bowie and said Elton's on board, and so on until
Sure.
they were all on board, and then the snowball was well and truly rolling down the hill. He sometimes announced people at the press conference who either hadn't decided yet, like Brian Ferry and Tears for Fears. In both cases, the artists were very, very annoyed, but Geldof called their bluff and said, "Well, you announced that you're pulling out." Brian
Wow.
Ferry didn't, but Tears for Fears, who'd been touring for a year and had booked a holiday to recuperate, just went on holiday as planned, concluding that their involvement would have no impact on the amount of money raised. So
Possibly true,
yeah, I
although I
think
do love
so.
them.
Yeah, I do too, and they were very big at the time, so it would have been nice to see them there. I can imagine Mad World would have been quite poignant.
Hmm.
But or Everybody Wants to Rule the World. No, maybe that would have been in bad taste.
Shout. Yeah.
Probably, yeah. Uh, that's the lineup of the Philadelphia concert, but I will come back to that. There are some conspicuous absences in the lineup. So Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics wasn't interested, and Annie Lennox had nodules on her vocal cords. Cyndi
Okay.
Lauper was meant to duet with Patti LaBelle, but didn't make it. Joan Baez, is that how you pronounce that name? Baez?
Baez, yes. Hmm.
Yeah, not a name I know. Shocking
She's so
lapse in my
Canadian.
cultural knowledge. Okay.
Yeah.
So she did play the show, and she wrote in her memoir that Cindy underwent, quote, a mysterious abdominal surgery that she never discusses, unquote.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Billy Joel, Waylon Jennings, and
Waylon.
Chris Waylon, yeah. Waylon Jennings and Chris Christopherson were included in the promotional material for the
Yeah. They were
Philadelphia
doing the
half of the show.
Highwayman thing at that time all
Right.
together. Yep.
Is it like a supergroup like the Traveling Wilburys?
Correct.
Right, gotcha. So they were included in all of the ads, but none of them actually appeared. Uh, Billy Joel said he couldn't get his band together. Paul Simon was going to appear but dropped out because he kept having arguments with the show's promoter, Bill Graham. Huey Lewis pulled out 2 weeks before the concert because he was concerned that the money wasn't getting to famine victims. It's probably right.
Don't say that loud enough for Bob to hear you. He'll come after
Okay,
you.
okay. Everyone in Culture Club wanted to do it, but Boy George was really struggling with some addiction problems at the time and wasn't sure that he would have been able to put on a good show. Would have embarrassed himself, he feared. But he also had misgivings about the whole enterprise
Mm,
and said later, quote, except for Bowie and Queen, I found it boring and self-congratulatory.
mm. Well, I
It's
guess
a
we can sort of discuss that as we go. Like, is it boring and self-congratulatory?
it's a valid question to raise, I
I
think.
think so.
Frank Zappa refused because he didn't think the money raised would be used to address the underlying causes that you talked about. It's just throwing food, and that's not going to
I
help
can see
anything in the
Frank
long
saying
term.
that 100%.
Right. He later called it, quote, the biggest cocaine money laundering scheme of all time,
Ah,
unquote.
Frank. God love him.
Love it.
Mhm.
Uh, Cat Stevens came out of retirement and showed up on the day at Wembley with his guitar and a new song he'd written specially for the occasion, but he hadn't told anybody he was coming, so nobody allowed him on stage,
Oh, dear. Well,
which
that's
I think is
awkward.
hilarious. Yeah. He thought it was still Woodstock, bless him. He just thought, I'm sure it'll be fine. Nobody knew who he was.
Yeah,
The Smiths weren't asked because they weren't
because
big
everyone
enough.
hates Morrissey.
Well, I wasn't going to say it, but
There you go.
but they apparently it was because genuinely because they weren't big enough at the time. But Morrissey's description of the Band-Aid song as quote daily torture and quote an awful record can't have helped.
By the
Fun
way, I want to
fact.
point out that like I was mixing up Joan Baez with Joni Mitchell. So Joni Mitchell is the
Oh,
Canadian. Joan Baez is American, but has kind of a similar
ah,
sound. Full like lady playing guitar, piano, whatever. Kind of easy listening, but causey. You know.
yeah.
Sorry.
I think she opens the Philadelphia concert. We'll
Okay.
get there. Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr met to discuss reforming the Beatles with Julian Lennon on piano, but scrapped the idea as soon as it was leaked to the press.
Hmm.
Could have been interesting.
Could have been. Yeah,
Yeah,
it would have been like Woodstock.
yeah. Frankie Goes to Hollywood were asked, and Holly Johnson said he wanted to do it, but the rest of the band and their manager didn't because they distrusted the other band's motivations. Similarly, Rod Stewart's manager pulled out because his client wasn't getting the right amount of publicity. He
Oh
wanted
dear.
Rod to be on CBS News at 10 o'clock. On finding this out later on, Rod was not happy. So there we go. The concert was originally scheduled for the 6th of July, but it clashed with Bruce Springsteen's daughter's horse riding competition. So Geldof moved it to the week after in the hope that Springsteen would participate. He still didn't.
Oh my god. You
In
know,
fairness,
look, I am not going to continue to make analogies between Iconicon and something as enormous as this, but
mm,
just from having done the planning for something that small with the number of people, I completely get like trying to like find the perfect day and time with so many people and like it's absolutely mind-blowing and then you make these concessions and then something else happens and you changed it for nothing and it's Ugh. I have a
yeah,
lot of empathy for that.
yeah, I know. I'm amazed that he tried it, to be honest, because apparently Springsteen, in fairness, doesn't do this sort of thing very much.
Well, he
I'm.
did after
Did
he
he?
Oh, yeah, we're gonna get there, though,
Mm,
don't worry.
okay. Heavy metal bands were asked.
Wow.
AC/DC declined. Def Leppard were going to perform but had to bow out because their drummer Rick Allen lost his arm in a car accident.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
famously. Yep.
yeah, that's the time. Apart from genre representation erring towards pop, you might notice another glaring omission from the lineup: black people. The concert is very, very, very white, and this led to criticism of a new form of cultural colonialism, as if the British would do such a thing. But
No,
in
you guys don't know
fact,
anything about colonialism.
no. not at all. But in
Especially when it comes to
fact,
Africa, right?
oh yeah, we, our sheet is completely clean as far as it comes to Africa.
Mhm.
But in fact, it wasn't intended that way, quite the opposite. So every major black artist in the US was invited to participate. Stevie Wonder initially agreed, but then backed out because he didn't want to be, quote, the token black person. Lionel Richie's manager understood what they were trying to do, so he did appear. Ashford and Simpson, Branford Marsalis, Billy Ocean, Patti LaBelle, and the Four Tops and Tina Turner also contributed. But Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, Ray Charles, and Dionne Warwick are conspicuous in their absence, especially as they appeared in We Are the World, which we'll get on to.
Yes.
You might think, why isn't Whitney Houston here? But this is just
It's
before
right
she
before.
became really famous. It's the same year that she became really famous, but
That's right.
her album wasn't released until February. So there we
Mhm.
go. Prince said that he'd retired from live
Prince,
performing.
as we will discuss continuously through this episode, was not having it with any of this charity stuff. Like he was
Right.
not into it at all. God
he's
bless him.
he's
Like I love him, but he was not having it.
he's fascinating.
He
Um,
is.
it- so he'd retired, according to him, but instead, by way of a contribution, he sent a black and white film of himself saying "Feed the world" whilst laying naked on his bed.
That's motivation. I mean,
Yeah. Uh, this was politely turned down. He did help Madonna choreograph her performance, though. So
uh,
watch that and see whether you think that helped. Which sparked rumours that the reason that she'd rushed to his home beforehand was to secretly marry him. Yeah,
what?
yeah. This is what the tabloids were thinking.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what a pairing that would have been.
Mm. Quite. And reportedly, Sting had originally planned to do his set on Live Aid with a full band, all of whom were black, but they demanded payment before they went on stage. And
I
he
mean,
told them to do something that I can't say live on Retro Blasting's channel, but it was rude. And then went on stage with his guitar and just started to play Roxanne solo by himself. So that's why Sting is alone, reportedly. I have one source for that.
okay.
And also, so the question is why the lack of participation? And there's one theory, but I'm not sure about it because it only comes from one source. So apparently, when Geldof visited Ethiopia in January, he was accompanied by a representative of Africare, which is a Black American aid agency. And that representative told him that they had terrible difficulty getting black entertainers and sports people to do anything for them because they, quote, had little or no social responsibility. Now, I would
Wow.
also counter that with, well, yeah, but what are the motivations of the people who are actually participating?
Yeah.
So I think it's a more complicated picture
I'm
than,
sure it's more complicated. So, I'm sorry,
yeah.
can you remind me, like, the date of the concert or
So it's
concerts?
the 13th of July in the UK. Yeah.
If 85?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I
Yeah.
know, like, the do they know that it's Christmas is Christmas of 84, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, it's sort of like 7 months after that.
Yeah.
Got it. Just trying to put that in context for myself. Okay.
Okay. Some of the artists in the eventual lineup might seem odd today, especially to an American audience. The writer of one of the books I read in preparation for this episode was particularly sniffy about Nick Kershaw having a four-song set in in the Wembley concert.
Is
But
that
I
long?
swear that was the biggest amount of songs that anybody had. I mean, Queen only had like 4 or 5 songs.
Okay.
So yeah, um, but I promise you, Nick Kershaw was massive in 1985. He'd spent 62 weeks in the UK charts at that point, beating every other solo artist. Admittedly, he tanked in 1986. So
Okay.
it was pretty sort of like whoop. But yeah, he was big. He was big. He
Okay.
still records and writes, notably for Chesney Hawkes' hit "The One and Only" in 1991. If anybody remembers Chesney Hawkes, and I love Nick Kershaw. You're
I'm loving his hair, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's not as fulsome now as it used to be.
Well,
He
of
probably
course not, but
doesn't hold a samurai sword by the blade anymore either, but there we go. Uh, Adamant only had a slot for one song and committed the cardinal sin of performing his new single.
oh
The f-
no.
yeah, you don't do that. The forgettable Viva la Rock, rather than playing one of his hits. Spandau Ballet also performed a song from their latest album. Attempting to promote your latest song during a charity concert instead of just donating crowd pleasers is such a faux pas. George Michael repeated it himself at the London 2012 Olympics. He refused to appear unless he could play his new single, and it was not taken well.
Mm-mm.
Phil Collins appeared in both the London and Philadelphia concerts, because that's the amazing thing about this. There was a concert in Wembley and then they handed over to Philadelphia. And so this concert ran for 16 hours.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
continuously. It's amazing, really, when
The
you think about it.
logistics of that
Yeah,
are just staggering.
yeah. So Phil Collins managed to appear in both because he was flown by TV presenter Noel Edmonds by helicopter from Wembley Stadium to catch a flight on Concorde from Heathrow, which was rerouted so that it flew over the stadium so that the crowd could wave at him as he went past.
He
Uh,
looks like he is wearing a hat from Mary Poppins times. Like,
that's Elton John. That
that's what
was
I
his,
mean.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's his standard approach back then.
Yikes.
Yeah. Said Noel Edmonds, quote, "We shuttled people to London Transport's cricket ground about 400 yards from Wembley Stadium. On the day, it was the climax of their cricket tournament, and they wouldn't abandon their game for us, so the umpires had whistles, and when they saw a helicopter approaching, they blew the whistles and cleared the field."
Jesus.
wouldn't
Surreal.
wouldn't cancel the cricket. How British is that? I
Well,
love it.
that is pretty British. Yeah.
Yeah. So Phil Collins, while he's on Concorde, he encounters Cher on the flight, and after she expressed interest in the concert, having not heard about it, he suggested that she just show up.
Oh no.
And yeah, you can see her in the finale singing "We
Oh
Are the
really?
World." Yeah, she made it. She got there. So
Okay.
Phil has the dubious honor of being the only performer to play the same song twice. His unforgettable power ballad, "Against All Odds."
Wasn't
I
that
just
part
love
of
it.
like that movie with
It's Jeff
is
Bridges,
the
isn't it?
ballet one? Is it the ballet movie or is it no,
I
it's
haven't
the
ever
Jeff
actually
Bridges.
seen it.
Okay.
It's Jeff. All I know is the single cover had Jeff Bridges and some woman on a beach
Oh yeah. I can't remember what that's is that the name of the movie? I don't know.
against all that. It possibly, yeah, I don't know.
Nice. I do remember the song very well.
Oh, yeah. So there were 72,000 attendees to the Wembley concert.
Wow.
Queuing started at 6 a.m. We Brits love a queue.
Mm-hmm.
Doors opened at 10. Tickets cost £25 at a time when the average weekly wage was £188. So this is a lot of people's
But you're
money
getting
that
a
they're
lot
donating.
for your money.
Yeah, you are, and you feel good about it too. So
Yeah,
can't
sure.
complain. There were 90,000 attendees in Philadelphia. Princess Diana and then Prince Charles, he's now our king,
They
welcomed the
look
performers.
photoshopped into this thing, and I don't know who Prince Charles is talking to in this
Yeah,
image, but sweet lord.
It's not flattering,
It's
is it?
no, but mm,
Yeah.
okay. Against all odds. Anyway, go ahead.
But they were there. They welcomed the performers backstage before the show began in London. Diana straightened David Bowie's tie and expressed concern that Adamant would melt in his leather trousers.
Mm.
Or pants, sorry. At Wembley, the organisers had constructed.
Nobody likes a bitchy princess, Conrad.
Sorry.
It's a famous Fran Drescher quote. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yes. At Wembley, the organisers had constructed it's really clever, a rotating circular 3-section stage, like a lazy Susan. If you look at the stage carefully, you can see that it sort of comes to a point at the back. And you notice that the performers and the sort of monitors that are facing them are sort of in a loose sort of circular. So you can kind of see it, although you never actually saw it on the day when it rotated. They always sort of cut to something else, like a video or the numbers to call to give your donation. So there was always at any one time one band performing, one band breaking down their equipment because they just performed, and another band setting up their equipment ready to be rotated on. Really clever. There's a really great backstage photo of it, but it's controlled by one of those big photo agencies, and if you broadcast it in any way, shape, or form without giving them £5,000, they sue you all to hell. So
So
I
just
can't show
describe
it
it
to
with
you.
words. That's fine. But it's
Yeah,
genius idea. Like
it's very clever.
and I feel like even though Def Leppard was unable to attend this, their subsequent tour after Rick Allen recovered from losing his arm, and they did the Hysteria album went like triple, quadruple platinum or whatever, and they did this
Wow.
huge Hysteria tour. They did a performance where they were in the round as well, but instead I believe the audience was like mostly all the way around, and the stage sort of slowly turned so that every side would be able to see them at some point, which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
Sort of a
it's really clever.
twist on this idea.
As typical for British engineering, it wasn't working the day before, but they stayed up all night and managed to get it fixed. At the JFK Stadium in Philadelphia, it was much trickier. Brian Adams said that it was pandemonium. Bands would be setting up or dismantling gear behind a curtain on the same stage, and sometimes you couldn't tell who was playing and who wasn't.
Wow.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share some memorable moments from the concert. You can watch most of it on YouTube now. Live Aid has a channel, and all of the proceeds from watching it will go to the Live Aid Trust. So I recommend watching it. It's quite entertaining because I
Mm-hmm.
watched it all. So a memorable moment for you. Geldof performing I Don't Like Mondays, which was inspired by a 1979 school shooting in San Diego by 16-year-old Brenda Ann Spencer.
Yep.
He halted the song on the line, "And the lesson today is how to die," prompting a roar from the crowd as he held his fist aloft. And Gary Kemp of Spandau Ballet said, watching from the wings, it felt evangelical, like Bob would make a very frightening politician, was his comment. But it's,
Yeah, I could see that.
yeah, but it's widely thought that the moment gave the concert a poignancy that up until that point it had lacked. It had been sort of fun. It kicked off with Status Quo, which is like a 70s pub rock band. And it was all sort of bouncy, bouncy. We're all having fun. But this was the moment when people felt that it achieved sort of a sense of poignancy. Another memorable moment for you. Bono dove off the stage at one point after pointing vociferously at some woman in the crowd. He eventually pulled somebody out of the crowd and then danced with her.
Which is a
And
very Springsteen move, by the way. But
it is, yeah. It wasn't Courtney Cox, I'll tell
no,
you that. The lady in question later
she
revealed that she
looks
was
like her.
actually, yes, she does. But no, she later revealed that what he was alerting people to was the fact that she was being crushed.
Mm-hmm.
So she says that he rescued her and then danced with her. Oh.
Because what you
S-
want after nearly being crushed is to dance
Yes, with Bono.
with like, and then pass out because it's with Bono. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but this is given as an example of how the event itself had, was about being sort of close to people, sort of throwing away the the divide between artist and fan. That it was more down to earth somehow, about connecting or something like that. Now, obviously, the biggest performance,
Oh,
or often cited as the highlight of the show,
just, oh my
was
God.
Queen's set.
Yes.
Uh, its lavish recreation as the climax of the recent biopic Bohemian Rhapsody about Queen in 2018 solidified its reputation as such, although it falsely depicts it as a reunion for the band after falling out. In fact, they'd just completed a lengthy tour together. They were very well rehearsed and they'd never split up.
Mm.
One glorious moment from the performance, which highlights Freddie Mercury's almost supernatural stagecraft. He was leading Wembley Stadium in one of his glorious games of a cappella call and response. It's quite
Mhm.
magical to watch. I love watching it. He did a similar vocal improvisation from their Wembley Stadium show the following year, and that was replayed during the closing ceremony of the 2012 Olympics in
Mhm.
London. And Freddie appeared on screens all around the Olympic Stadium, and the 80,000 people assembled there just couldn't stop themselves. They started repeating back what he was singing out to them. So
Yeah,
beyond the grave, Freddie has this spellbinding effect on audiences that will never leave.
absolutely.
It's magical. Incidentally, that was the last night the UK was happy, just in case you were wondering.
Yeah, I
Never
see you
since.
have a clip. Are you gonna please show the clip? I know it doesn't have the sound, but just seeing it is so amazing
Yeah,
just to
it
see
gives you a
him.
sense of his control. So this was during Radio Gaga, but just look at him controlling 72,000 people in unison. Apparently the sight of everybody doing the Radio Gaga double clap and fist pump, people in Philadelphia watching started joining in, even though they didn't even know what it
I
was.
mean,
Yeah.
it's astounding when it gives me chills just thinking about it. He's such an amazing performer.
Yeah, he's one
So,
in a million. He's incredibly charismatic. But yeah,
yeah.
I can't play the sound unfortunately because YouTube would kill us.
Yeah, I'm gonna be taking some risks in my section, but they're short clips, but I feel like they help illustrate, so
Yeah. The Philadelphia half of the concert tends to be overlooked in memories, certainly here in the
I didn't even
UK.
know there was one.
No, I didn't either. I was in bed. I was a kid. I wouldn't have known. I had no idea. So the show was opened, as I mentioned before, by Joan Baez, and she called it the '80s Kids Woodstock. But it wasn't quite as selfless and ego-free as that might suggest. So there was a lot of vying for position
Of
on the
course.
lineup in the American side. In the Britain side of the fence, people just did what they were given. There apparently wasn't much debate about it, but Madonna's manager fought for her to appear in a time slot when the Brits and the rest of the world would still be awake to see her because her star was very much on the rise.
Mhm.
The Wembley show cost $250,000, equivalent to put on, because so many of the participants donated their time and their labor and resources.
It's like
The
Dragon Con in
Philadelphia
that way.
show, right? That's not intentional, though.
Mhm. Nope.
No. The Philadelphia show, by comparison, cost $3.5 million because everybody wanted to get paid.
Well, I mean, it's America. What do you want?
Yeah.
I do love seeing how many of these artists are actually British. I
Yeah.
mean, Black Sabbath is, let's see, well, Bryan Adams is Canadian, right?
Yeah.
Neil Young is also Canadian. So, yeah, I mean, we have a few that are
Yeah, you've got the Thompson twins in there. and
Mhm.
Duran Duran.
Zeppelin.
Yeah. So it's Phil Collins again, because why not? Apparently, it's because the Wembley lineup got too many people came forward, so they started just shoving them on
Oh,
a
you
plane
get
and
put into
telling
the
them,
like, the junior varsity team gets to go to
yeah,
Philadelphia.
you're on the midnight shift.
That's right.
Yeah. But apparently there was camaraderie backstage. At one point, Eric Clapton, Phil Collins, Ronnie Wood, Jimmy Page, Keith Richards, and Bob Dylan were all huddled in a trailer together, helping Robert Plant write down the words to Stairway to Heaven, which he hadn't sung for so long he wasn't sure exactly how it went.
Wow. Well, I'm looking at this, Conrad, and it's blowing my mind because we've got, like, Judas Priest and, um, Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin all performing, like, for me, that's, like, what's jumping at me, and Santana, and I'm just like, "Wow," and I literally have never heard of this until we did this show.
Mhm.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it?
Mhm.
So, in terms of memorable moments from the Philadelphia show, which I know little about, I'll be honest, but there is one that apparently is immortal, and perhaps not for the same reason as Queen's performance.
Oh,
Um,
no.
yeah. Alas, Led Zeppelin reformed, and Plant and Page weren't getting on very well at the
Oh,
time,
no.
and their original drummer, John Bonham, had passed away in 1980.
Right.
In the end, they recruited two drummers, Tony Thompson from the disco and funk band Chic.
Okay.
Yep. And Phil
Phil
Collins on the
Collins.
basis that, yeah, he was there.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think it was on the basis that Bonham always sounded like he had four arms, so they thought, well, let's have two. Now,
Right.
Collins said that as soon as he arrived, he got the impression that Thompson didn't want him to be there, and Plant and Page had a cloud hanging over them. His microphones were turned off during the Stairway to Heaven rendition because it became apparent he didn't know how to play it.
Oh, dear.
So Plant and Page have blamed Collins, but people have said that Plant's vocal performance and Page's guitar tuning was also off. So the result was described as, quote, shambolic by Page and, quote, a effing atrocity by Plant. They
Hmm.
blocked it from appearing on the DVD, but it's on YouTube if you hunt for it. So if you
I
want to
don't wanna see
see,
I don't wanna see that. That's just sad. That makes me feel sad just thinking about it. I love Zeppelin. I just don't wanna think about that. But yikes. I mean, his pants alone are a travesty.
bless him. The double necked guitar is fun too.
Yeah, it is.
Uh, a Geldof and team were unable to persuade Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan to record video messages of support to broadcast during the breaks between sets. But fun piece of trivia for you, Melinda.
Mm.
Who do you think was president that day?
Well, I mean, Reagan was president during the '80s.
He was, but he wasn't president on that day.
Why is that?
So, Vice President George H.W.
Mhm.
Bush was acting as president because Reagan was having polyps removed from his colon.
Oh, okay. I was like, it wasn't during the shooting thing. So
No.
okay. Okay.
Yeah. There you go. Fun bit of trivia for your friends. Ask them who was president during Live Aid. It wasn't Reagan.
Got it. Weird.
So the show was the largest scale satellite link up. I've got some numbers for you here. Good old
Wow.
spreadsheet corner. It was the largest scale satellite link up and TV broadcast of all time. 14 satellites ferried the signal to 500 million television sets.
Oh my
An
god.
estimated 1.9 billion people in 150 nations watched the show live. So that means more people watched this than watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, probably more people had televisions as well by this point.
Yeah, the population was bigger, but apart from
It
that,
still sounds pretty impressive though.
it does sound impressive when you roll it off like that.
Yep.
And also, it was the multimedia decade. So
Mhm.
you had cable TV, satellites, and VCRs allowing audiences to record and time shift anything for the first time. the emergence of 24-hour news channels, lifestyles becoming content. But this was sort of the first worldwide televisual event of great note, it is said, in
Mhm.
retrospect.
Yeah.
The BBC was instrumental in making it so. Geldof apparently originally approached Channel 4. We had 4 channels back then. So he approached the 4th one, but they couldn't figure out how to manage 16 hours of live programming. So,
It tells you a lot about how TV was in the 80s.
oh yeah. So Roger Lawton, head of daytime programming at the Beeb, who was a huge advocate for change and understanding the plight of the Africans, persuaded Michael Grade, the BBC controller. The show was moved from BBC Two, which is kind of the cultural channel rather than the mainstream channel, to BBC One to avoid clashing with coverage of, guess what, Melinda?
Is it cricket?
It's cricket.
Yes.
It
I'm
just had
learning
to be.
so much about British culture.
Indeed, yeah, it's got to be. Cricket must not be moved
No,
under any circumstances.
absolutely not. Mm-mm.
But it also is thought to have given UK pop artists a new kind of global celebrity that they'd never had before. So it did create a kind of cultural imperialism, rivaling the influence of Hollywood on worldwide popular culture,
Mhm.
and ushered in a new era of pop music that needed nothing more than an ability to connect to a large audience. Suddenly, the idea of filling a stadium the size of Wembley, the original Wembley, it's no longer around, unfortunately, became the benchmark of success. And a second British invasion was already underway in the US, so British acts apparently accounted for a third of all chart places in 1983. So this sort of added fuel to the Britpop fire.
Mhm.
But it's thought that it also demonstrated how mass media could be used for good. Um, Sting said, "We learned how much we can accomplish if we bypass the political process. In fact, we learned how to hold the political process in some contempt, since governments had not been able to confront the issue of starvation." So that's Sting holding forth.
That's making a lot of assumptions about the impact, right?
It is, and we'll get on to that. Most importantly, the fundraising. Geldof said it was not a concert, never to me. It was a TV show, and the TV show was to get at one end money. Bob famously became quite disappointed with the progress of the fundraising during the show and crashed the BBC commentary box to make sure the message was getting out loud and clear, in the process, famously dropping an F bomb on live TV when he became impatient with BBC presenter David Hepworth, who wanted to read out the mailing address for donations by cheque. And Geldof said, "F the address, let's get the numbers because that's how we're going to get it." It's often remembered apocryphally as him saying, "Give us your effing money." But that's not true. It's like, frankly,
Yeah,
my dear, I don't give a damn is real. Play it again, Sam. That's apocryphal, isn't it? It's not
right.
actually in the movie.
And Luke, I am your father.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
yes. It's not
Yes.
that.
It's not true.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. So he didn't say that, but he did drop an F bomb on live TV. So just to take you back, more people watched Bob Geldof drop an F bomb than saw Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. But it worked. His earnest desperation did stir people because donations increased to £300 per second after his outburst.
Wow.
300 phone lines were available to take credit card donations. They raised £11 million in the UK and £36 million in the US on the day of the concerts. 50,000 £5 programs and 10,000 posters were sold out before the show had started, and the £8 t-shirts were sold out almost immediately. Eventually, the final tally, once all the money, including those checks that Bob was so unimpressed with,
Mhm.
was counted, they raised £150 million,
Wow.
which is about the same in US dollars because famously the pound was at an all-time low at the time, nearly as bad as it is now. Um, which speaks to the generosity of working people because this was not a great time economically for the UK. And there were many tales of generosity, like old ladies in Ireland pawning their wedding rings. One couple sold their first home and donated the proceeds. And the Republic of Ireland is said to have made the most donations per capita despite being in the middle of a recession. So, yeah, that
Wow.
was Live Aid.
That was Live Aid. And
Mm,
uh, I hate to say, like, the only thing I knew, I don't even know if I was super aware of Live Aid. I was definitely aware of
wow.
Band Aid and the Christmas song. But then, of course, once Christmas is over, you don't think about it anymore, right? Like, that's the
Mm,
problem with it being kind of a Christmas song. Um, I feel like I probably did know about Live Aid, but not much about it. I don't know. I don't know how much it was aired like in my area at the time, but
mm,
what I do remember very much, like most Americans probably, is We Are the World. Um,
yes.
it was sort of, it's the American analog, of course. Um, a lot of the stories that I'm going to tell you now are coming from an article in The Independent and another article in Rolling Stone, which are kind of going beat for beat through like everything that happened with We Are the World. So coming out of Live Aid and well, Band Aid actually, because Band Aid happened Christmas of '84. So immediately after that, Harry Belafonte was inspired by both that song and the production that was ongoing to make Live Aid. And he wanted to organize a song recording in the US so that we could also help raise some funds for the Ethiopian famine. So a new organization was formed called United Support of Artists for Africa, which is what USA for Africa actually stands for, because it seems like it's the USA, like United States of America for Africa, but that's not what it means. So just before that Christmas of '84, Belafonte contacted Ken Cregan, who was a big time manager at that time, to help get some of his well known clients to participate in like a US song type thing. And a lot of his clients included people like Lionel Richie, Kenny Rogers. And so later they managed to secure some of their friends like Stevie Wonder, Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson. Jackson was fresh off of his Thriller release and a tour. So
Oh,
he
wow.
was huge at the time because it was like
Mm.
right after Thriller. So
Peak
Michael,
Jackson, I
it
think.
was definitely peak Jackson. He was full like sparkly glove and like crazy socks and all that stuff. So Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie wrote the song together at the Jackson family home in about a week. So they wrote that song. And the final lyrics and melody were completed one night before the recording session was scheduled.
Wow.
So very tight timeline. So the first night of recording was on January 22nd of 1985. So very, very short turnaround time. Because remember, this all started right before Christmas. So it's like a month has lapsed since Harry Belafonte reached out to Ken Cregan.
Yeah.
So Lionel Richie, Michael Jackson, and Stevie Wonder and Quincy Jones, they all began laying down backing and temp tracks. And wording changes were still being made, including changing the line, "There's a chance we're taking our own lives," was changed to "We're saving our own lives," because they didn't want it to sound like people were offing themselves.
I was going to say, why was it taking to begin with?
I don't know. It's a great question. Jones also suggested altering the former part of the line. "One thing we don't want to do, especially with this group, is look like we're patting ourselves on the back. So it's really there's a choice we're making instead of there's a chance we're taking."
Mm,
Right.
okay. Yeah.
So January 24th, so 2 days after that, Jones sends the artists all these numbered cassettes in preparation for the upcoming recording session. So they're numbered so that they can be collected when the artists show up to record so that none of them leak out to the press.
Ah. Yeah.
Of course, how hard was it in 1985 to just have a double deck tape deck and just record from one tape to another? Not super hard, but
Hmm.
nonetheless. Ken Cragen did go to great lengths to be sure that no one leaked the project details so that all the celebs would be willing to participate. Like, so they didn't want like the media or other people to find out where the recording was going to happen and then show up and scare off the celebrities because celebrities don't want to deal with that stuff. So they also determined which singer would do which line and where everyone was going to stand. That was all dictated and determined in advance based on like almost like a wedding seating chart, right?
Right.
And then January 28th, 1985, at the A&M Recording Studios is the final and the main night of the recording. So the We Are the World session was scheduled the same night as the AMAs, the American Music Awards, because many of those stars were already going to be in Los Angeles for that show. So basically, what they asked these stars to do is they go to an award show in their outfits or whatever, and then immediately following that they like take a limo over to this recording studio and log in, and they literally spend the entire night there recording. So they're
Oh,
up
wow.
for, they start at about 10 o'clock and it goes to like 6 to 8 a.m. So
That's
they're
not
like,
good for the voice.
no. So um so yeah, it's let's see. I have, this is of course the image of all the people. There is a documentary that was made of the event, which you can find on YouTube. It's pretty fun to watch. Some people may have seen it even back in the 80s. It was released on a VHS tape. I, of course, oblivious to that. It's hosted by Jane Fonda, and it
Oh,
feels
great.
very dated. So I just want to give you a little bit of flavor from the intro portion of this documentary.
A bit like a dream. The vision of an artist community coming together, declaring that an urgent common concern was more important to them than musical differences or individual renown.
Yeah.
And that actually reminds me a lot of this clip from Heather's.
School has been torn apart by tragedy. I'm here today to fuse it back again through togetherness. We need to connect this cafeteria into one mighty circuit.
Excuse me, please.
Hey, look!
Coming through.
Here comes the TV crew. Lock your paws.
Looks like Miss Flem's on another one of her crusades. The usual success, of course.
Here, let's see something together.
Is this as good for you as it is for me?
Those fish sticks can wait. Let's go.
I'm gonna need a VHS copy of all this by Monday for my Princeton application.
Yeah.
It's sort of that self-congratulatory thing, but it's also like the coming together of all of these artists for a common cause. It's just so self-sanctimonious. Ugh. Like it, I don't know, it's just kind of cringy to me.
Yes.
So I just kind of want to quickly go through some dramatic inclusions and exclusions, much like your situation. You know, some of the celebrities that were both included and excluded have some notorious stories around it. So first and foremost, believe it or not, was the boss, Bruce Springsteen. The key moment in the organization of this event was when they finally got Bruce Springsteen on board. Apparently, his manager was saying, you know, oh my God, Bruce is finishing up 2 years on the road. He literally had been playing a concert the night before. It was like his last show of this really long tour. And, but once they said Bruce is in, like, they say that Ken Cragen said, from that day on, I never made another outgoing call. All I did was answer the phone. So kind of like you, once you get the big names on board, everybody else is like, oh yeah, for sure. Because by that point, then you had Michael Jackson, who was huge at the time, and Bruce Springsteen, who was also huge. Because this was like Dancing in the Dark era Bruce Springsteen.
Right. Okay. Courtney Cox again.
Exactly right. So another person that I really did not know was at We Are the World recording was Dan Aykroyd.
What? Why?
Yeah, so he's got this jacket and tie and big doofy dad glasses, and he looks like an accountant. He looks like, you know, a tax advisor or something. he did have a number one album with the Blues Brothers thing back from '78, which honestly is about on par with some of the other people who were there. But
Okay.
they they are like, apparently he said, my father and I were interviewing business managers in LA, and we walked into this office of a talent manager, which was ostensibly Ken Cragen, and realized that they were in the wrong place. He said, I was looking for a money manager, not a talent manager. But since he was there, the guy was like, hey, you should come to this We Are the World thing we're putting together, which is apparently how easy it was for some people to get asked to participate. And I want you to keep that in mind when we get to some of the people
Okay.
who were not there.
Hmm.
But it's just so weird because you see him, he's standing next to Harry Belafonte in the back row, and you're just like, I mean, I know he is a singer, but he's just not like, he's not Michael Jackson level celebrity.
Well,
Okay.
no,
He's,
if you're thinking of a comedian who also had a music career, then I would think of Eddie Murphy.
and we'll be talking about him shortly.
Ah,
In fact,
interesting.
we're talking about him right now.
There he is. Wow.
So Stevie Wonder had asked him to attend, actually, but he was literally recording Party All the Time. And he apparently just didn't realize like the scope or magnitude of what they were doing. He was like, I don't really get what you're doing. That's what he says now. I don't know if he's just sort of covering for himself not being there. But he said he felt like an idiot later once he realized how huge We Are the World turned out to be.
Hmm.
So, another person who was there and then wasn't there was Waylon Jennings, who you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So apparently, this is the apocryphal story, right? So there was some kind of huge argument after about 1 a.m. And there were these nonsense words that Michael Jackson had added into the chorus of the song, which were something like shalom shalinge, which doesn't mean anything. It was just sort of like a background, like bop bop beep bop, like kind of thing that they were singing underneath, like as a pad for something else. But Bob Geldof said we shouldn't do that because it's going to sound like we're mocking African language if we do that. Like it doesn't come off well, right? And so Stevie Wonder decides, well, I'm going to call my friend who lives in Nigeria and get a Swahili phrase that we can use instead. And then apparently Ray Charles allegedly said, say what? Willie Mongo? Like, which was what the phrase ended up being, something like Willie Mongo something. He says, it's 3 o'clock in the GD morning. I can't even sing in English anymore. And so at that point, Waylon Jennings was like, I'm out. I'm not singing in Swahili. It's not going to come across well. It's going to look really weird. And then at the same time, Geldof started saying, well, Ethiopians don't actually speak Swahili. And it was just this whole thing. And this is the problem with people coming up with ideas midstream and going, well, what if we did this? And then you've got like 45 artists in the room and they're all like, what are we doing? Like, whatever. So, that was sort of a thing. And you never see him in any of the imagery of like the recording session, but he was briefly there. But one person who wasn't there, much like you've discussed earlier, is our friend Prince.
Ah, there he is.
It's just such a great photo. I think you used the same one. So he was supposed to sing the line that Huey Lewis ends up singing, which is, but if you believe there's no way we can fall. It's like into the, like, I don't know, it's a certain part of the song, but by most accounts, Prince never had any desire to participate in any of this, much like he didn't want to participate in Live Aid. He was willing to contribute a song to the USA for Africa album, and I believe he did. And I think he sent Sheila E. as the Paisley Park representative, right? And he also did offer to play guitar on the track, which they were like, we don't need him to play the GD guitar. We want him here, you know. So
But no nude film this time.
no nude film this time. But so his
bummer.
manager, Prince's manager, told him if he's going to skip the session that he needed to claim illness because it's going to look really bad. And he said, no matter what you do not go out and party after the AMA Awards because the publicity is going to be really terrible if people knew you blew off a charity gig to go out and party. So what do you think Prince did?
Did he party like it's 1999?
He sure enough did, and he went out to a club on Sunset Boulevard where his bodyguard got into a fight and ended up in jail.
Okay, so it
On
was
a
low key.
Yeah, so on this night where all these other celebrities are doing this very selfless, wonderful charity thing, he just completely looks selfish and terrible. So, and then further on that, the guitarist from the Revolution, Wendy Melvoin, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but she later told in the book Let's Go Crazy, she says, I wasn't allowed to say the real reason at the time that he didn't want to go, but he thinks he's a badass and he wanted to look cool, and he felt like the song for We Are the World was horrible, and he didn't want to be around all those MFers. That's the quote. Which I tend to believe is probably true.
It's
Just
and
based on,
valid too. I mean,
yeah.
it is a terrible song.
What do you mean, Conrad? It's so great.
Oh, it's just the way it has that chirpy upward slide on "There are people dying." It's like, really? You're gonna
I think
sound
it's supposed
chirpy
to
about that,
sound.
Michael?
I think it's supposed to sound like wistful.
Yeah.
It doesn't, but I think that's what they're going for. Another person who was not there, as you mentioned before, was Madonna. She's never on the record spoken about not being involved in We Are the World, but Nile Rodgers, who worked closely with her as the producer of Like a Virgin, did give an interview back in 2020, and he said Madonna wasn't invited to sing on the recording, and it was a slap in the face because everybody was in LA for the AMAs, and it was really sort of not nice. I know she felt bad.
Oh,
but she's never
okay.
confirmed that, but that's what he says. And
Interesting.
another person who was not there, keeping in mind that Dan Aykroyd was John Denver.
Oh,
So John Denver is famously like very cause oriented. He's done a lot of other charity things for a variety of different causes, and he asked if he could sing on the track, like even in the background, but ultimately he was turned down. So Ken Cragen says he had to reject many musicians, including John Denver. He says John Denver was the hardest one to turn down. But apparently this snub really, really hurt John Denver's feelings. And he wrote about it in his 1995 autobiography, Take Me Home. And he said, it broke my heart not to be included.
Aw.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a popularity contest that's going on here, right? Like, so Lionel Richie told that Billboard that the pair that while they were writing the song, they were listening to a lot of national anthems to get a feel for the enormity of the song. So that may explain a little bit of like the tone of the thing.
Yeah.
And he says, when they weren't being interrupted by unexpected intruders, quote, I'm on the floor in Michael's bedroom, he said. I don't think he had a bed. He just slept on the floor. There's a bunch of albums around the wall, and I hear over my shoulder, there was a such and such effing python, a boa constrictor, a python. Who cares what the hell it was? It was a big ass, ugly ass snake. I was screaming, and Michael saying, there he is, Lionel, we found him. He was hiding behind the albums. I said, you're out of your freaking mind. It took me about 2 hours to calm my ass back down.
That's a wonderful snapshot.
Isn't it great? And also, according to Richie, who is apparently just a font of fun stories, by the way, if you're ever inviting someone to dinner from this group, always make it Lionel Richie. According to him, during a break from recording, when Ray Charles asked where the bathroom was, Stevie Wonder said, I'll show you where it is, Ray. Follow me. And Stevie Wonder took Charles by the hand and led him down the hall to the appropriate door while the other stars watched gobsmacked at the blind literally leading the blind. So, yeah, it's a definitely a fun the behind the scenes stuff, it's kind of interesting to watch the documentary because a lot of these stars haven't had a ton of time to rehearse this, right? They've just gotten the tapes booked like a couple days in advance. And I don't know if they had been given their lines in advance, but when they're showing up, they're trying to find their footing. And they captured a lot of them missing the mark quite a few times before they found the right take. So some of these people are having to do like a bunch of takes. And because you're recording everyone, like they had little groups of people standing by microphones, but you have like Steve Perry and like two other people. And all three of them, if one of them screws up, they all three have to redo their lines just because of the way they were recording it. They weren't recording
Yeah.
each one by one. So, but there is this one extremely memorable moment. If you've ever seen the behind the scenes, you probably already know what I'm going to play, but it's the best part of the entire thing. I would say it's better than We Are the World. And there's a moment where spontaneously everyone in the room starts singing the Banana Boat song to Harry Belafonte.
Ah.
And I've got a very short abbreviated clip of this just to show you the energy in that room. It's so great. So here it is. And then there's a Bob Dylan standing there just looking grumpy in the middle. But yes, it's a very long like verse of them just sort of ad-libbing it and singing it just to sort of like acknowledge his awesomeness. So yeah, it's just really fun to watch. So on March 7th, 1985, the single was released. And it was released primarily as a 7-inch. Like I had the 7-inch as a kid. There was a full album like that I mentioned, like Prince contributed a song. A bunch of other artists contributed songs for the full-length album. The song was the only one released from the We Are the World album, though. So like it wasn't, the other songs weren't charting singles and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it was a success generally around the world. In the US, it was a #1 hit on the R&B singles chart and the Hot Adult Contemporary Tracks chart and the Billboard Hot 100. And it was there for about a month. It was promoted with a music video, video cassette, and several other items that were made available, like books, posters, shirts, buttons, all that stuff. All that money went into the fund. Unlike Live Aid, finding out about like exactly what happened to the funds raised by this is very difficult. Like they really didn't release a ton of information on it, and some of it's a little, I don't 100% always believe the numbers. So, but the song's commercial success, I do want to talk briefly about this. It received mixed reviews from journalists and music critics. So some people really loved it. They thought it was a great, thing. But American journalist Greil Marcus felt that the song sounded like a Pepsi jingle. And professor and activist Rebe Garofalo agreed and called the line, "We're saving our own lives," a distasteful element of self-indulgence. And he said that the USA for Africa were proclaiming their own salvation for singing about an issue they will never experience on behalf of a people most of them will never encounter.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Yeah. But so the thing about this and Live Aid combined is that they start an avalanche of a bunch of other charity singles. So it becomes like a trend in the 85 and 86 particularly. It was just, they were everywhere. Big scale, small scale, crazy scale, whatever. So I just want to pull out, we're getting, low on time a little bit, but I do want to point out a few of these noteworthy ones. So the first one I want to talk about is our brothers to the north, Canada, did their own version called Tears Are Not Enough. And it was the group is called Northern Lights. Also came out in 85 to raise money for the Ethiopian famine thing. And it was issued as the album's second and final single by the song was issued as a single on May 1st of 85 and reached number 1 in the Canadian top 40. There's a shock. Although recorded independently of USA for Africa, it was included on the full-length We Are the World album. So that big 12-inch album had this song on it. They did a little documentary for this as well, which is highly entertaining, and I do recommend it. I think it's pretty funny. Noteworthy in that documentary are a bunch of scenes, like a bunch of them, okay, where I assume it's Bruce Allen. He's the manager. He's like the guy, the Bob Geldof of the Canada thing, where he's the manager though, and he's like getting people to sign up. So they have all these what really to me feels like staged phone calls of him calling celebrities and trying to coerce them or their managers. We've got to get this person. We've got to get them. And so I'm going to show you a very short clip to see if you think that this looks staged.
Bernie, I want to get some of your acts in the benefit for the Ethiopian thing. And one of the person we want to get Leona Boyd. I know she can't sing, but I'm cutting the instrumental tracks in Vancouver. I know she can't sing, but God, we got to have her in there. She's a recognizable face.
There's just so much of this. It's him. It's like the cameraman loves this guy, and it just stays on him, just constantly talking to different people about we've got to get this person. Oh my God, we've got to get him on the horn. Like, it's crazy. So
I've never heard this song at all.
Oh yeah. It's very sappy. People included in the song are Gordon Lightfoot, Anne Murray, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Bryan Adams, Corey Hart, Geddy Lee from Rush, and Mike Reno from Loverboy. It's got this. It's very sappy. It's every bit as sappy as We Are the World, and probably a little more.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So
never heard of it. I don't know if it made an impact in the UK at all, this song.
Yeah.
Because we heard We Are the World. I know that one.
Sure.
But
sorry.
I don't remember the Canadian one at all.
Well, all of the audience, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to go and listen to Tears Are Not Enough. Yeah. Tears are not enough. Like, it's very Hallmark card sounding. Another, and it wouldn't be me if I didn't mention Hearing Aid, which there's a little story I have about Hearing Aid. So Hearing Aid was a charity record made by a large ensemble of 40 heavy metal musicians and released in 1986. It was weirdly recorded in May of 85, and I think it probably would have done better had it come out in 85. But for some other weird reasons, like that had to do with contracts and stuff like that, they couldn't release it until 86. The project was organized by Ronnie James Dio and Jimmy Bain and Vivian Campbell, who were all members of the band Dio. And proceeds from the album were used to raise over $3 million for famine relief in Africa. I do have, there's also a documentary about this, and it's very fun to watch, especially for me, because there's so many great musicians here, like all in one room, mid 80s metal at its height. Like, it's just so great, like Dokken and Jeff Tate from Queensryche and all these people. But there's a wonderful little short clip that I have to play here from the metal god himself, Rob Halford from Judas Priest.
Rob Halford, the Beast from Judas Priest. Ronnie invited myself and the rest of the band, but they couldn't make it, but I came anyway, to come down and do this wonderful project. I think it's great because this is the only sector of music that hasn't really done anything in the form of relief for what's going on over in Africa. And it's just a joy to be involved,
He's
so
adorable. I just love him so. There were 40 musicians. They were all gathered to sing the song Stars, which I have to admit, I was completely oblivious to this. I didn't know it happened. I had heard of Hearing Aid, And I thought it was such a cheesy title that I never looked into it. And I literally, the rumor was that it was to raise money for hearing loss
Yeah, that's what I would have thought.
amongst metal musicians,
Yeah.
but it was for Ethiopian famine. Um,
There's a
they,
lot of hair in that room.
I know. The rest of the album was filled out with 8 other tracks contributed by artists who were either on tour and couldn't attend or whatever. And it was released, the music video was released, and there's like a behind the scenes thing as well, which is, like I said, fun to watch. If they had actually learned from some of the issues that happened in terms of getting the money over there from Live Aid and We Are the World, and they actually formed an official nonprofit with a full board of directors and everything to manage the funds and ensure distribution to those in need. So they actually used their money to purchase and ship agricultural machinery as opposed to food.
Right. Okay.
So we had like Dio, Rob Halford from Judas Priest, Kevin DuBrow from Quiet Riot, Eric Bloom from Blue Oyster Cult, Jeff Tate from Queensryche, and Don Dokken from Dokken, amongst many others that are there in the photo. And then the last one that I just want to touch on very briefly, because it's so surreal and it's literally the reason we're doing this today, is sorry, I'm going to skip over some of these. Hands Across America.
Right.
So Hands Across America is such a weird idea, but the idea, it was literally run by Ken Cragen, who is the guy who put together We Are the World. And it's sort of run by the USA for Africa group, right? But it was put together as a public fundraising event as opposed to a concert on May 25th, 1986. So 5 to 6.5 million people were going to hold hands for 15 minutes in a chain across the United States, all the way across from coast to coast, in an attempt to form a continuous human chain. And unfortunately, it technically failed, right? So because they didn't like have everyone strategically laid out correctly. So you can't see it so much in this, but I'm going to show a very, very short clip of this song. It's so bad. There's a song that went with it that was released on the radio.
Oh, of course.
It's terrible, but you'll see a lot of celebrities even in this short clip that I'm going to play.
Oh no.
Oh yes. The people apparently they paid, like most participants paid about $10 each to reserve a place in line. So that's how they made a lot of the money. And the proceeds were donated to local charities to fight hunger and homelessness and help people in poverty. So it was really more for America as opposed to Africa. And it was like homeless children. A lot of it was focused on that.
Right. Okay.
Notoriously, as you see in the top left corner of the image here, Ronald Reagan participated in this. A few days before this event, he actually made the statement that no one in America was starving because there was not enough food or money. It was like basically he was saying it was laziness. If people were like homeless or starving, it was, we have a land of plenty here. So yeah.
You're just not trying hard enough.
You're not trying hard enough. So the event raised about $15 million for charities after operating costs, because there were a ton of operating costs. People would show up at these events though, and they would kind of clump together. So they weren't in a single line. They would all stand in these like groups and just kind of be like, hooray, we're here. If they say that if they had like literally held hands and spread out, that they would have definitely had enough people to form the chain. But instead what they did was you see the cow in the bottom, they used livestock and like not threads, but like ropes and stuff like that to bridge the gap in between people when there weren't enough people.
Okay. This is just giving me Jordan Peele Us flashbacks. That must be what they were referencing in that movie.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I know, like, I'm just going to briefly mention these others. So we did have Artists United Against Apartheid, which they did Sun City. It's a great song. Check it out if you haven't heard it. it's probably my favorite re-listenable song of all of these charity songs, and that includes the metal version. And then That's What Friends Are For, Gladys Knight. I didn't even realize that this was like I'm sorry, Dionne Warwick. Um, I didn't know that this was like a fundraising thing, but it was a one-off thing with Gladys Knight, Dionne Warwick, Elton John, and Stevie Wonder, to raise money for the American Foundation for AIDS Research. And so, and that was in 1986. I knew the song, but I didn't know it was a fundraiser at all.
Right. Okay.
And then Farm Aid. I know a lot of people were mentioning that, but that actually grew out of We Are the World, because people are like, well, what about all the farmers here? So we got Farm Aid, which is still going on even to this day. They do Farm Aids.
Yeah, was it Bob Dylan that made a reference to it during Live Aid?
It was. And then there are a couple of spoof ones. The most notorious one is Something to Believe In by the Ramones in 1986. Weird Al is in the video, which is sort of making fun of people being self-congratulatory celebrities doing all these charity songs and stuff like that. So that's kind of a fun video if you get a chance. It's hands across your face instead of hands across America.
Love it.
And it shows various hands holding each other in various settings, and it's juxtaposed with images in parody of other aid videos and songs. Like the song's hook line, "I'm looking for something to believe in," is frequently interpreted as making fun of true believers, like who actually believe in helping a cause in this way. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there were a few more in the UK as well, if you'd like to hear about those.
I would, yes.
So very briefly, Ferry Aid in 1987. So this was in response to a disaster where an 8-deck passenger and car ferry, called the Herald of Free Enterprise, capsized after leaving the Belgian port of Zeebrugge on the night of the 6th of March 1987, with its bow doors open.
You mean like the place where the cars drive in?
Yep, somebody left it open.
Oh my God, that's a big miss.
That's a big miss. Yeah, 193 people died.
Oh God.
So the Sun newspaper had sold cheap tickets for that particular day and felt a bit responsible, I think. So they organised a British-American supergroup to raise funds for a charity set up in wake of the disaster. It was recorded and produced by Stock, Aitken and Waterman, the hit factory, the sausage factory, the producers behind Kylie Minogue, Rick Astley, Jason Donovan, Sonia and Bananarama. It was released on the 24th of March and remained at number 1 for 3 weeks in the UK, and it featured Boy George, Pepsi and Shirley, Mel and Kim. I'm not expecting you to know who any of these people are. Kim Wilde, Nick Kershaw, Kate Bush.
I know Kim Wilde and Kate Bush.
Yeah, Mark Knopfler and Paul McCartney, although it turned out he just handed in his original vocal track for Let It Be, which is the song that they covered. And of course, Band Aid was resurrected in the years afterwards. So Band Aid 20, which was the 20th anniversary, of course. There was Band Aid 2 as well. I should mention that. That was that was in 1989. So another Christmas, and that one was produced by Stock Aitken and Waterman with pretty much the same lineup as Ferry Aid. But Band Aid 20, which was the 20th anniversary, which was aimed to help a humanitarian crisis caused by the Darfur conflict in Sudan.
Right.
And that featured, just to give you a sense of the era, Busted, Coldplay, The Sugar Babes, Keane, Snow Patrol, Will Young, Robbie Williams, Natasha and Daniel Bedingfield. Remember them?
Nope.
The Divine Comedy, The Darkness.
I don't know any of these people except Robbie Williams. And that's only because Tony Roberts from Analog Toys is a huge Robbie Williams fan. And while he was visiting, he exposed me to a lot of Robbie Williams.
Okay. And Dido. I don't know if you know Dido.
Yeah, I do. I do know Dido.
There you go. Dido was everywhere in the early aughts.
For sure.
And Damon Albarn is listed on the credits as T-Boy. There's a fun fact. Okay. It spent 4 weeks at #1 from the 5th of December. So still
Okay.
reasonably successful. And then
So they're
Band
just
Aid,
doing the same old song, though? They're not, like, getting a new song, they're just redoing the old song?
same song. I think they swap out the lyrics sometimes because sometimes it's not starvation, so they have to sort of fiddle it around a little bit,
Okay.
to make
Okay.
it something else. So yeah, Band Aid 30 was in 2014. It raised 1 million within minutes of its debut on the X Factor and was #1 for a week in November, but vanished soon afterwards. And it was intended to raise money for the Ebola crisis in Western Africa. And as a sign of the times, that one featured One Direction, Coldplay, still hanging in there, Sinead O'Connor, Ed Sheeran, of course, because he's everywhere. Game of Thrones, anywhere it shows up.
Uh-huh.
But also a sign of the times, YouTubers Alfie Days, Joe Sugg, and Zoella. Yep, that happened.
I mean, yikes. I
Yikes, indeed.
Uh-huh. So I think this brings us to the end of all the different shows we're going to talk about. There are more of them. In the 80s, it was like a huge thing. Some of them continue on like this. There was also, I didn't include it because it's technically not music related, but there was comic aid or comic relief, sorry. I think the concept of comic relief started in England, right, Conrad?
Yeah, it did. So
And
it was
that
the guys behind Love Actually.
and Red Nose Day came out of that, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
but over here we had the Billy Crystal, Robin Williams, and then later Whoopi Goldberg production every year that was comic relief, and it was sort of like a show on HBO where all these comedians came and donated their time, and then they had like a huge live like concert essentially, but of comedy to raise money. Primarily the ones that I remember from like 1988, I think, were like for homelessness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think comic relief is pretty much the same. So there's a like a telethon with comedy things, like they do
yeah,
a
exactly.
comedy version of Doctor Who for fun and stuff like that.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of other ones too that were smaller and whatever, but I think these are sort of the main ones, and I think the idea of charity as spectacle overall was very much an 80s thing. And so the question is, how do we, coming out of having discussed all these things, how do we feel? How do we all feel about that? Like, do we feel
Mm.
like, you know, it was a good thing? Do we feel like it actually made a difference? Like, what are your thoughts, Conrad?
I think it is an early demonstration of what social media would become at its best, which is
Hmm.
just this crowdsourced grassroots movement to do something good. Um, I think celebrities inserting themselves into it is always questionable. Yes, they have a platform, but then when you get to things like the recent pandemic and you've got celebrities that were obviously starved for attention singing Imagine
It's a different kind of
badly
starving.
on Twitter, then yeah, exactly. Then it all of a sudden it just feels like, hey, we don't need you guys. We're just like we're talking amongst ourselves. You can just go away. We're fine. So it feels like attracting attention to yourself to share a stage with these moments just feels wrong now. It feels ill-advised, I think. And there's
I
always the question of where the money goes.
I think so. I do think that there are probably ways that people with this kind of money, power, and prestige can help and use their considerable resources for good. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't try to help, uh,
Yeah.
which would be a terrible thing to say. But I think there are probably ways to do it that are going to come off a little better.
Yes, I think that's fair.
Because, yeah, so, like, if you have a lot of money, you can just give money, and you don't have to advertise that you did so. If you're someone like Oprah was in the 90s, you can certainly call attention and inform people about something they may not have heard about to make it more well known that some horrible thing is going on, and we all need to be aware of it. So raising awareness, I think, is probably okay. I guess it's okay if they get a little fame alongside some of that stuff, but I just I don't know, some of it starts to feel a little preachy, icky. Like, it's different, I think, when they actually go there and like do things. Like going there and like seeing it in person, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Like does Princess Diana going over and actually being much more hands-on involved with, suffering children in Africa, like, come across a little better than someone sitting in the comfort of their home, their mansion somewhere and saying, "We should probably help those people." I mean, I feel like it does. I don't know if you do.
I think, yeah, I don't have a problem with using your platform to raise awareness. And I think, yeah, Bob Geldof staged a massive concert that we've all remembered that's like a cultural icon. At the same time, there's also the question that in a lot of cases, it revived careers that had been flagging up until
Mhm.
that point. And so at that point, you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable about it, especially when they're playing their new single rather than the hits. I don't know if anybody remembers the band Chumbawamba.
Oh god, tub thumping.
Tub Thumping, yeah. So you
Oh
remember them sort
god.
of as a one-hit wonder of a novelty song, but actually
Right.
they were quite radically critical, and they released an album that was called Pictures of Starving Children Sell Records in 1986, and it
Wow.
was pretty savage, and it's quite entertaining to listen to. I would recommend you check it out.
I think
So they were questioning this aspect of it.
that sounds so KLF to do that. I honestly, I
Mm,
think that it's a very complicated, everything about this is actually way more complicated than it sort of seems on the face.
yeah.
And I think it's sort of worth thinking about it, like, what should, if not this, what should celebrities do, if anything, when there's some sort of huge crisis that needs addressing? Like, they have money, they can get other people to give money. It's not, I don't know, if I think that they were all, for the most part, a lot of them anyway, were probably pretty well intentioned. Maybe not when it comes to like, oh, well, I want my time slot to be the best time slot. And all those kinds of things start to sound crappy. But let's be honest, the Hands Across America thing led to a bunch of states being really pissed off because they weren't in the line of, like, the line across America. Like Washington State, like, made this huge thing about the fact that they weren't included. So it's always like, what about me? But what about me? How can I also benefit from this thing that's supposed to actually benefit other people?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I guess the good thing is all the people that went to the concert and all the people who donated felt good about what they were doing, and it's something that people will never forget. It's an experience that people will never forget. So
that's true. That's true.
that's no bad thing.
Um, so I'm gonna read through a few of our chats. I have one super chat, I believe, from Brian Dillingham. Thank you so much. He says, "Have a great show. I have to catch on the replay." Jason Anderson says, "Prince is kind of famous for his not having it." I think that's true for sure. Mrs. Scuba Pete, that's Leslie. She says, "Such great back information. Thanks for all the research." You're very welcome. KBA says, "Tori Amos did a cover of I Don't Like Mondays," and honestly, I Don't Like Mondays, that's the version I was thinking of when you mentioned it, from her Strange Little Girls album. Because
Yeah.
I think I'd heard the song, but I wasn't that familiar with it. Jason says, "Shambolic is the word of the day."
Yeah.
um,
This next
and
one was one that I highlighted. So Jason Sanderson talked about on Tears Are Not Enough. He said, "Does it count if I go listen to the ABC song instead and say I listened to this one?" And the Night Badger says it counts, but only if you listen to the whole of Lexicon of Love. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. That album is produced by Trevor Horn, and it's a masterpiece from start to finish.
really?
So, yes. So,
Okay. I
well
am
done
not
for pointing
familiar.
that out. No, there you go. We also got another comment from Jason saying, "My mom drove us up to Long Beach to participate in Hands Across America. It was the most boring thing I think I ever experienced up to
Oh,
that point."
wow. Wow, Jason, that's so cruel.
I love it.
Um, Yeah, and Jason also says, followed by Band-Aid 30 with their song, "We think someone might know it's Christmas," and Band-Aid 40 with, "We still can't figure out when it's Christmas." And then
Yeah.
Band-Aid 60, "Nobody knew when Christmas was, so now we sing about dogs."
Band-Aid 70, "We finally figured out that they're majority Muslim and don't celebrate Christmas."
It's funny because Ethiopia actually is, at least in large part, a Christian country, although they have a very diverse population, some of which are Muslim and some of which are other faiths,
Yeah.
which is part of the reason there was all that infighting and stuff like that. But yes, it's a good point. I always, as a child, I remember always thinking they may not know it's Christmas because they may not be Christian.
No, I think you're right. I think, in fairness, to be completely accurate, I think that was a criticism that was leveled at them when they were doing the campaign for the Ebola crisis, because that was a different area of Africa and it wasn't quite as relevant lyrically.
Right. So that pretty much wraps up this episode of Dreamland. We will be back next month, or actually later this month now, because we had to delay this episode, with our next show. And Conrad, what is our title for next time?
Well, yeah, I do you even better than that. We even have a title card for next time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the watchword for next time is Johns.
Johns. We have a secret artist who has helped me and us out by putting together this clue-laden image that should help you, should help the viewer to discern what we might be talking about on the last Saturday of this month coming up. So there are some clues along with the word Johns. There are some clues in that lovely image there. Thank you, Jeremy, for the kind super chat as well. So yeah, until then, you can follow me and Conrad on Retroblasting and Movie Oubliette, respectively, and on all social media outlets. And you can email us at thedreamlandpodcast@gmail.com. So thanks so much, everyone, for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.